Tom Keating was, according to the British Museum, the most prolific and versatile art forger of the 20th century. What makes that fascinating to me, which has fascinated me about writing this story, is that throughout the 20th century, there have been painters who learned how to fake 2 or 3 painters well enough to pass them off as originals. Tom Keating did over 2,000 pastiches, paintings that looked like he never copied anything. He did pastiches, paintings that looked like they were done by other painters, over 2,000 of them by over 160 different artists throughout the history of Western art. From the Italian Renaissance to modern Expressionism, from Michelangelo and Rembrandt to Modigliani and Matisse. So this is a Rembrandt drawing with walnut ink on 300-year-old paper. This is an interesting part of the story where one morning Tom got up, announced to Jane, his protege artist, student and partner in crime, and her brother Michael, who was visiting at the time, that they were going to go off to the coast, a couple-hour drive, to find a dead seagull, to get some seagull feathers to make pen quills so that he could draw these drawings with. And then they stopped at a farmer's market and bought a big bag of walnuts. They stopped at an antiquarian bookstore and paid £500, multiply that times 20 to get the value into US dollars today, for an old 300-year-old German book that had 7 blank pages on the inside of each cover. That evening, he produced 14 drawings like this in rapid succession with walnut ink that he made himself with some nails and boiled walnuts, and passed them off as original Rembrandt drawings 300 years after Rembrandt's death. Michael O'Kelly is a brilliant fine artist and my best friend. We met back in 1993 at a cafe that I owned at the time. And shortly after he did his first show of his own work there, he started telling me about his sister and this crazy Father Christmas figure called Tom Keating, who I'd never heard of at the time, but have since spent 10 years of my life studying. And he had some pretty amazing stories to tell about them. And he had actually he'd done a couple of iterations of having someone do professional Hollywood screenwriters to do a screenplay of this story, and didn't like the results because it wasn't authentic. And then he actually got someone to start writing a treatment of it, where he was recording Michael and then starting to write a book about it. And I read that and I thought, you know what? I think I can do better. And thus began the project of writing this, what is now a 900-page trilogy of the life story of Tom Keating and Jane Kelly.
Tom Keating was the nearest thing I'd ever met in real life to a Jekyll and Hyde character. He could on one moment be the sweetest, kindest, funniest, gentlest, most helpful person you'd ever met. And suddenly another time he could cut you into pieces verbally and make you feel incredibly small. And as a 13-year-old, when I first came from Wales, very, very naive, to London in the middle of the Bohemian 60s, I'd never met a character like that in my life, and I was just a young person. My sister, who was 4 years older than me, was ready for that kind of life in London.
Tom Keating, the most prolific and versatile art forger of the 20th century, was born in 1917 and died in 1984. He came home from World War II shell-shocked, got a grant to a posh school in London, already knew more than his instructors on how to paint. He was a genius at painting in any style. Got ripped off by art dealers that he was working for as a restorer, and thus established a vendetta against the art world. His belief that most art dealers and auction houses, Christie's, Bonhams, Sotheby's, rip off the buying public and customers and artists alike, and he set out to mess with them by flooding the art market with paintings. He did this mostly in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and in 1963, a young woman called Jane Kelly moved from Wales to London, a couple of blocks away from the cafe where he hung out most of the time, across the street from his studio. Her name was Jane Kelly, and the only living person that knows this story that was a member of, that can call Tom Keating a member of his family, is Michael Kelly. And so Michael Kelly and I have spent the past 10 years telling, recording, researching, documenting all the various aspects. He has some incredible stories to tell. I have over 200 articles from the London papers that were still available, confirming all the amazing details.
Jane was my hero by the time I was about 11. We didn't get on before that. She used to whisper in my ear, you know, you're adopted, you know, things like that. She was pretty mean, but we learned to love each other very much, and she became the closest person I think I've ever known in my life. She was incredibly smart. She passed every exam. She rode horses, won gymkhanas. She was ready to go to university when she was 17, a year before one normally goes to university. She was going to be a marine biologist. She'd been trained by my father in that respect, and as well as in drawing and researching. And then she got mad at him because he uprooted us from Wales, came to London, lost her horse, we lost everything, and she decided to revolt and become a bohemian artist herself and learn the secret techniques of the old masters. And she encountered Tom in Kew Garden Station, and everybody said how great he was, and she fell for it. We had to do a huge amount of research. This is a 60-year-old story, and it's been ruminating inside my head for years. I didn't know what to do with it. But then meeting Todd and having him get involved, he made it clear to me that I can't just say something and he writes it down or we write it together and it's published. We had to make sure it was verified, that things are real, that the people did what I'm saying they did, and being able to show, yeah, it's in the newspapers, it was recorded here, it was in Sotheby's over here. So it took time. It took the time it took.
I have I think at last count, over 270 newspaper articles in the London press mostly, but also the New York Times, papers from around the world, Australia, Los Angeles, Toronto, Canada. So Michael would tell me these things, and I think, wow, that's amazing. And I'd go look it up and find it printed in newspapers. You can subscribe to the Times of London and get free access to all of their archives going back to 1784. So all of the stuff is in the papers, and especially the part where their trial happens for 2.5 years. From July of 1976 to January of 1979, they were on the front page. They were in the press from July of 76 through January of 1979, and then they were on the front page of every paper in London for that month that they were on trial. So all of that research was fun to do. In addition to that, as previously mentioned, I actually phoned up. Michael knew that they lived in this 400-year-old manor house in Wattisfield, somewhere in North Suffolk. I looked up on Google Earth, found that place, contacted a place that was next door, a construction firm, and said, hey, could you put me in touch with the person that lives in that place next door? And I'd like to talk to them. And a week later, I got an email from Joe at Wattisfield Hall, and he sent me pictures of the inside of the place, which obviously made it a lot easier to tell the story of the fantastic things that happened at the wild parties they had in that 400-year-old Tudor brick manor house.
Todd, we've known each other for a couple of decades or more, and I'd like you to tell me, just for my own peace of mind, why did you get involved with this project in the first place and work with me for 10 years? What was your reason, your rationale for that?
It's a fascinating story. I've been hearing you talk about your sister and these wild tales of this adventure when you were she was yanked out of her idyllic championship horse jumping competitions. Her horse sold like a piece of furniture because your dad bankrupted your pub and had to move in with your aunt in London. And then she immediately met up with this artist in a local cafe 30 years her senior and announced to her dad that she was going to jettison her full grants to Oxford to study marine biology to instead take up fine art painting lessons with Father Christmas. Michael, it's been 60 years since this story began in 1963. Why do you want this story to be told now?
The whole series of events has been brewing in my mind ever since my sister passed away in 1992, really, because for all the time she was with Tom Keating in England and the Canary Islands, and I lived with him half the time. It was just part of our life. But when she passed away, and I thought about it, all the newspaper articles, the trial, all the people's points of view about it were that she was somehow the villain and Tom was the folk hero. That she was some young woman who used him for her own benefit. And the truth never really came out about her and her involvement with Tom Keating as a student, a young person with an older man, as a lover, and as a true friend who saved his life, literally saved his life. He was about to take his own life and she saved it. That story about her was never told, and it festered inside me. I wanted to tell the true story as best I could about my sister and her involvement with Tom Keating.